Welcome to the FLL virtual conference by CRyptonite. My name is Anaya Baig. I'm a Cinco Ranch High School senior, and I've been first for 7 years, all throughout middle school and joining FRC in high school. I became a mentor as soon as I entered high school, and I became an FLL liaison in my junior year, helping manage and create teams in the local area, as well as organize events for FLL. So we're going to have a quick safety moment by our very own safety captain, Emma Smith. And here she is.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emma Smith. I'm the VP of Safety and Training on Team 624, and I'm going to go over some basic safety tips for quarantine and staying safe online. First off, make sure to stay quarantined if you can to minimize your exposure to viruses and germs. It's crucial to stay hydrated, eat healthy, and get as much sleep as you need to keep your body strong in case you do come in contact with any germs or viruses. It's also important to wash your hands frequently and take care to get underneath your nails. If you have artificial nails or chipped nail polish, germs can thrive underneath the artificial nail or in the crevices of the nail polish, so take extra care if you fall under that category. Make sure to disinfect surfaces you touch pretty frequently, like your phone or your keyboard or your kitchen counter. This will prevent the buildup of germs. It's also important to avoid touching your face as much as possible. Because whenever you touch your face, you transfer all the germs that have accumulated on your hands to an area where they can infect you. To stay safe on Zoom, make sure to create passwords for your meetings, otherwise a stranger might be able to get in your call. We've all been using computers way more as of late, so it's important to take extra care in monitoring it for viruses as well. If your computer is running slower than usual, make sure to scan it to see if it's infected. As an extra precaution, you can also invest in a firewall or antivirus software. That'll scan whatever you interact with to see if it comes from a reliable and safe source. It's also important to minimize all potential contact with viruses on your computer. So you can do that through avoiding clicking on suspicious ads or links from unreliable sources, where you could get a form of malware called ransomware. Ransomware locks off your information or portions of your computer until you comply with your hacker's demands. To be extra safe, you can also employ preventative measures like backing up all your data on an external hard drive or installing a firewall or antivirus software. You should also avoid using the same password for multiple accounts, as if you lose a password on one account, you lose safety on all of your accounts. That's all from me. Thank you for listening and stay safe.
Thank you, Emma. So, as you may have noticed, this virtual conference is hosted by Team 624 CRyptonite. Here is some facts about us. So we started our season in 2001 as the Cinco Ranch Engineering Wizards, or CREW for short. Our founding sponsors were BP and Oceaneering. A year later, we became CRyptonite. In 2003, we began spiking our hair and spraying it green at competitions, a now traditional staple of our team. In 2009, we won our very first blue banner. Flash forward to today, and we've won 14 blue banners and many awards to show off our hard work. And in a team that started off with 2 sponsors, we now have more than 20. All of this is possible because of our wonderful and hardworking mentors who have volunteered their time to guide and support us through 80 team members. Our team also loves to do community outreach in our community, and this is what we've done in the past. We've run 32 science day camps, exposing more than 3,000 kids to STEM, and held 20 KD CRyptonite FLL qualifiers. We have partnered with SEWA International to host STEM demos for children of refugees, and created more than 100 STEM boxes for shelters and underserved communities. And finally, after years of lobbying to our district, KDISD built a $6.2 million STEAM center that now houses 6 FRC teams and supports STEAM activities for 16,000 students per year. We just celebrated our 20th year as a team, and are proud of our well-rounded and diverse team. So here is a quick overview for this Zoom meeting today. You can, we have not given you the permission to unmute yourself, but if you do have something to say, you can open the chat and send any chat message you'd like to the host, panelists, or attendees. This is also how you can ask questions during Q&As and during presentations. And if you need anything from the host or co-host, you can raise your hand and we'll get to you. And at any time you can leave the meeting, but you can always come back before we end at 4 o'clock. So for today's agenda, we have two topics today, game analysis and coaches tips and tricks. The game analysis will have a 40-minute presentation by Mr. Phil So and a coaches tips and tricks presentation and panel presentation by Mr. McGill and a panel full of coaches that I think will be very helpful. And then after that, we'll wrap up and talk about next week. So without further ado, I will let Mr. So present his game analysis presentation.
I've written up this presentation about how beginning teams should think about FLL game strategy because it's based on a lot of our experiences, a lot of our the stuff we've learned from other teams over many years. My personal background, I've been a coach and mentor for FLL teams since the 2008 season. Starting with my son's team back in 2008, and they last competed in 2012. And since then, we've coached or mentored quite a few teams from 2013 to the present, and many of those have won a lot of awards. I've also served as a judge and at local events and at World Championship and as a head referee at some of the local events. And my work background, I do electronics R&D I've done that for the last 37 years. Okay. This is an outline of all the various topics we're going to talk about. As I said, a lot of this material was learned the hard way. You know, a lot of mistakes. Let's see. We should start with your team goals. You should take into account the skill level of your team members to determine the boundaries for what your goals are. You know, there's various things you could aim to do, like have fun, do some cool stuff. There's many things to learn. What's not obvious is that there's a lot of soft skills that one can learn, like analytical skills, critical thinking skills, organizational skills, project management skills, time management, people skills, and conflict resolution skills. This is also a good opportunity for adults to learn some of these skills too, and various other things. And I know personally I've learned a lot of these myself and improved. Some teams want to score high. Well, that's something you build up to over usually a couple of years. And if you're aiming to win specific awards, well, a saying they have in this program is all who do the work win. But in essence, you know, those who want to win the Robot Game High Score Award, our advice is typically to aim for consistent performance. There's also the big award, the Champions Award, and that's for teams that are very good and balanced in all-around performance in core values, the research project, robot design judging, and the robot game performance. So to start off your season, you should really start off with a thorough understanding of what the rules are. They change the rules every year. There are certain rules that are pretty much the same every year, but there's a different game each year. So it's crucial to understand these rules to get good robot performance and to avoid frustration. One should know what needs to be done, but also what does not need to be done. I've often seen, as a referee, I've often seen teams doing things that they're not actually required to do, but are kind of hard to do. There's also some scoring conditions that can occur just briefly during the match, and then others that must exist at the end of the match. And I use the word study instead of read because you can kind of think of the competition as the exam. Also studying in knowing the rules, you can avoid a situation where a referee like myself is telling a team, oh, that strategy or that mechanism is not legal and what you just did doesn't count. The last thing is that they update the rules to cover some discrepancies or things that aren't clear, and they tend to be released on the same day each week. Since they released the current one, there have not been, well, there was an update the very first week, but there haven't been any since, but there can be some in upcoming weeks. So some of these updates can either make something that was difficult to understand much easier to understand, or it may sometimes make something you're trying to do illegal, or it may make something you're trying to do a lot easier. So keep up with those. Okay. Oh, it's a good idea to spend a reasonable amount of time on analyzing the rules, analyzing the game. And typically it's a good idea to spend about 5 to 15% of your total season. If you're just out to have some fun, 5% of the time that you're going to commit is probably sufficient. If you're going to try to score higher or whatever, then spending a bit more time would be prudent. What you'll find when you analyze the rules is sometimes there's hidden freedoms, and sometimes there's hidden restrictions. There's also missions where if you go and study the rules, it's really multiple parts, and the thing you have to keep in mind with those is that you don't have to do it all. You have to understand, okay, if I just do this part, I'll get some points, and then you'll get points for doing some other parts. And generally, part of it is relatively easy to do, and some of it is a lot more difficult to do. So depending on your skill level, you can break it up and just go for partial marks, so to speak. Another important thing to understand are the words in and on. And in some of the older game manuals or rule books, it was defined more explicitly. So we can talk about that afterward if need be. Okay, game analysis. So a lot of people are going to ask, hey, what do you think about this year's game? You know, one of the things we've learned over these years is that a lot of teams focus too much they dive right into designing a robot and their attachments and programming it, and don't put a lot of time and effort into consistent and reliable navigation, and that leads to a lot of frustration. The design, like each year the field is different, and so that may have an effect on your robot design. Like sometimes there's only little narrow passageways. One year there was like a bridge that you had to drive under, so clearly that kind of puts some restrictions on what you can or cannot do. In many years, there's been like a compass printed on the field, which makes it easy for people to talk about, what they're doing. But this year there isn't one. Hopefully that makes a return. Often, like how we've gone about rating the difficulty of the task is not just the difficulty of making the mechanism for doing the task, but also taking into account the difficulty of the navigation to get there. Um, um, and each team will have to go and define what their level of, their threshold of difficulty is, or what is considered difficult for themselves. For example, on this particular field, looking around on this field, if you go through the rule book, there's all these missions, M00 through, what's it, M14, I believe is, M15 is the highest one. M00 doesn't require any driving around. There's a whole, okay, sorry. There's a whole bunch that are fairly low difficulty, and so you should solve them first. And in general, for teams that are starting out, I don't know if you can see the cursor, the ones that are relatively close by are going to be easier, like these ones, these ones, these ones. The ones way over here, you'll notice you'll have to trek all the way down here and avoid getting snagged on these things. So these are going to be a lot harder. And similarly, these ones here, although this is maybe a bit easier than getting down here. So next. One of the things we recommend is before you start thinking about things, well, one of the first things you should do is decide how you're going to make your decisions. Often people vote, and we don't recommend that, because often what I've heard is, I'm going to vote like Joey does because he's my friend. I don't know anything about this, but he's my friend. That's not really a very good way of doing it. The best way is to go base your decisions on data. And so you can do things like make lists of pros and cons. There's also more sophisticated methods like a decision matrix, and you can find information on that on the internet, like say at Wikipedia and such. One of the things we recommend to teams we work with is, these decision methods. When you make notes, say you list the pros and cons and such, or your decision matrices, go and show that to the robot design judges and your core values judges. It helps you in those other aspects of this competition. We also look to teach teams to look at what kind of navigational aids there are. A lot of teams tend to do this point and shoot and hope that the robot gets to the right place. An analogy that we like to use is, if you imagine that you're in a long hallway with a whole bunch of doors on each side, and you're asked to go to the third door and go and open the door. Well, if you just got sent off, yeah, you can do that. You can see what you're doing. But if you were blindfolded, you might have trouble with that. However, if you were to go and run your hand along the wall, you can detect each doorway as you go by it, and you can just keep going until you hit the third doorway, right? So one of the other things we teach teams to do is when they're planning the paths that their robot is going to take, that they should aim to get a positional reference about every 3 what we call moves. That's either driving straight or turning or pivoting or something like that. And that we found that tends to keep you on track very nicely. We've heard from teams that said, well, I tried using the light sensor or color sensor and they don't work, they must be broken or whatever. It's been very, very rare that we've actually heard of sensors and such actually being broken. It's more likely that whoever thinks it's broken just isn't using it correctly. And there are resources on the internet, such as EV3 lessons and such, that teach you how to use those effectively. And it's very worthwhile going to such resources and learning that, because it'll pay dividends down the road. There's also other mechanical methods for helping you with navigation. So I mentioned in the analogy of going down the hallway, of following along the wall. A lot of teams also use jigs in the launch area. When you're looking at each mission model, figuring out how it works, we recommend that you try at least 3 different ways, because often the most obvious way or the first way you think of doing it is not necessarily the best way. And you should think of ways to make it easier. For instance, sometimes you can imagine a target on the wall, and it's a very small target, and you're trying to throw, say, something very small, the size of a pea. You're going to have a really hard time hitting that. You can make it a lot easier by throwing a beach ball at it, because the ball is much larger than the pea. Conversely, you can make the target very large in some way. Basically, think of ways to force the outcome that you desire. Now, for coaches, it is perfectly acceptable in this program for coaches or parents to make suggestions, as long as the kids do the work, and to go and implement and refine the solutions. So you can go and ask leading questions to lead your team to the potential solutions. When you're looking at these various missions, we strongly suggest avoiding some of the time wasters, especially if navigation is difficult. So say, going back to this map here, if you're a rookie team or one that's just still learning, then spending a lot of time figuring out one over here may not really be a good use of your time, because even if you figure out a mechanism to make this work, if you can't get your robot down here successfully, then you haven't really accomplished anything. When you're trying things out, have your team members take notes, take pictures, things like that, and collect it all in a notebook. The robot design judges are typically really, really impressed with such material, and you'll do much better in that aspect of the competition. And use quantitative data to show how successful each method is. Because often when I've worked as a judge, it's like, how did you choose this? Well, this seemed to work. It seemed to work better than the other one. Well, how do you know it did work better? So if you go and say attempt it 5 times, what was the success rate? Then you have something to base your decision, a better basis for your decisions. And when someone's trying something out, it's helpful to have the other team members stand at different locations around the table and watch closely, because from a different angle, they may see something that is preventing that solution from working right, or they may see what is making it work right. So you want to make sure you keep doing that. And they can detect little things that make a big difference, like sometimes the timing of your motion, or the alignment of your motion with the mission model. That can often have a pretty big effect on the outcome. Um, when you're planning your missions, there's a website called TechBrick, and I have that linked in the resources page of this presentation. Every year they take a high resolution photograph of the field and make it available to be printed out on either 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 size, and it has areas around the sides that you can go and scribble notes on. And so what my teams have often done is they'll print off like 20 copies in color, and then they'll say, okay, here's one scheme, and then draw a path and make a bunch of notes. We do this here, we do that here, and then, okay, plan B. They take another sheet and kind of do an alternative, and then plan C, and then they'll discuss, oh, hey, which is better, plan A, B, or C? Let's see. When you're trying out the missions, it's very tempting to go and try and make some really big, fancy mechanisms, but the reality is often the task can be accomplished using just a simple stick, like a Lego Technic beam, or even one of the Technic axles. That's preferable because that's even lighter. In some missions, you'll notice they're relatively easy to get reliable and consistent solutions, and they may be worth a lot of points, or even just a moderate amount of points. It's not the highest scoring mission, but it's there in the middle. Go and work on those first, because there's always some missions that they are very attractive and get a lot of attention. They're really fun to play with, but when you go and look at it, they're like, say, way far away from your launch area, or there's a lot of obstacles in the way. And when you start playing with it, you find the mechanisms kind of sticky, and it's not very consistent. And then when you really look at it, it's not worth a whole lot of points. But a lot of teams spend a lot of their time on it, and ultimately they're not successful at it, and then they've wasted a lot of time and now don't have enough time to do the things that they're perfectly capable of doing. And I've seen a lot of teams fall into that trap, and it's kind of heartbreaking. And my sons used to say, when they'd go and analyze all the missions, and when they found the time waster missions, they'll make some comment like, ooh, the game designers are evil, evil men. Some of the other things to take into account when you're analyzing the missions is, how much time do you think this mission will take to accomplish? Because you have 2.5 minutes total. And if it's taking too long, or if you think it's too long, like you have to drive a very long distance, or some of these things you have to spin many, many times, then maybe you shouldn't bother doing that or developing that, and go get some easier to get points. And one last thing that's not so obvious is, some mission models are, by design, whether intentionally or not, they're very fragile. And one of the rules every year is, if you break a mission model, then you don't get the points for it. And that's not, it's not one of the main rules that most people read, but I've unfortunately had to tell many teams, no, sorry, you don't get points for that because you broke it, even though you were successful. So don't 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 make your referee tell you that. Okay. By design, as I mentioned, some of the missions are going to be very tough. They're designed to be a challenge for the very, very top teams in the world. And there have been some where our our feeling is nobody's ever actually really solved it in a satisfactory way. Conversely, there's always quite a few missions that anybody who's just getting started should be able to do relatively easily. So especially if your team's just getting started or still in the learning phase, best to go do those first, because you'll learn the basics you need to build up to the harder ones. And go and make lists of these things, prioritize them, and again, show them to the robot design judges. Now, one of the traps that my son's team has fallen into, and other teams we've seen have fallen into, is they want to score everything, or they want to score higher than what some team they saw on YouTube did. Well, the reality is that team on YouTube probably won't be competing at your competition. And here in the Houston area, we currently have the system of qualifying tournaments and then a regional championship. Well, you don't have to beat the best teams in the world to advance from the qualifying tournament. To advance from the qualifying tournament to go to our regional championship. You just have to do well enough, and it's a much easier task to do that than try to be a world class, to build the best in the world type robot. Watching YouTube, some people have asked about watching YouTube videos, and we've found that watching videos from previous years can give you ideas, because every year they're doing a lot of the same kind of things, but the game pieces are different. So you can get a lot of ideas from those to apply to your current year. And again, watching videos of the current game to try and copy it can be a trap, because often these videos don't show sufficient detail for less experienced teams to emulate the solution successfully. Videos don't show things like software, or they're usually taken from fairly far away. So if there's some tiny little special mechanism or something that's crucial to that, it's difficult to, if not impossible, to see that. The other thing is, a lot of teams, they go and something that's successful only 1 in 10 times, they'll run it 20 times and then take the one time each of those things is successful, splice it all together and make this really impressive looking video. But in real competition, they don't always work. So they're kind of misrepresenting what they're actually doing. Oh yes, one last thing. There have been some videos where we've watched them, and it's trained as a referee. I'm going, that was illegal. So that you definitely don't want to copy that. Now, having analyzed the game, you should then decide what kind of robot are you going to build, and make 2 lists, and make as shown here. And some of the things to watch out for is, I've seen robots where they built stuff on top of the screen and the control buttons, or on top of the USB port they use for programming, or it's covering the charging port for the battery. Yeah, that's totally legal and your robot can work, but doing things like that will make your life kind of miserable. If you think ahead, designate some keep out areas so that not to put things over your screen or your control buttons or those charging and programming ports, and enforce them so that everybody who's building the robot knows about them. And then designate specific areas for attaching your attachments to your robot chassis, and if you think of it that way, things will go a lot smoother. It's also helpful to have a flat back on your robot chassis so it can square up against the field walls. After making those two lists of the robot qualities, you can merge them together into a set of specifications. And you can, again, you can show these, your specification list to robot design judges, because they're looking for, one of the things they look for is, do you have a good development process? So, not only does having a good development process give you a better robot so you can, so your robot performs better on the competition field, but if you go and document it, which isn't a whole lot more work, you'll do a lot better in the robot design judging. And make sure that as you're actually building and programming your robot, you refer back to these specifications so that you do the things you were going to do, and don't get off track. Now this slide I borrowed from a presentation called Effective First Strategies. It's really for the FRC teams, the high school level teams that build the really big robots. And Karthik, I won't try to say his last name, it's really long. And anyways, Karthik gives this talk almost every year at a World Championship, and it's one that, it's just to standing room only audience, because he imparts a lot of wisdom. The team he was mentoring is one of the best in the world, and these rules, apply. I found that they apply in FLL. They actually apply in my workplace too, and I have some stories about instances where people broke these rules and didn't turn out very well. One of the things about golden rule number 2 is in FLL, just like in FRC, you don't get partial points. If you didn't accomplish the task, you get 0. So it's not inherently intuitive, but aiming to do fewer things but doing them really, really well, it typically leads you to scoring a lot higher. And this consistency is something that you really have to do. It works best if you design it in from the beginning. And our experience has been that if you take that approach, that you think about how do we make this solution consistent right from the beginning, rather your development process goes a lot faster and a lot smoother than you go build something and find that it doesn't work very well, and then you try to make it consistent. And our experience was also that doing this, you tend to, because things work well and they work as intended at the competition, then once you get to your competition, there's a lot less stress for everybody, the kids, the adults, everyone. I've mentioned this before, but it's really, really crucial to determine your team's limits and its capabilities. And sometimes the reality is a bit brutal. So I'd use the example of that mission that was way off in the upper right-hand corner. If it's a rookie team, then your chances of success at solving that mission are quite low. So you need to keep that in mind as you guide your teams. Generally, teams that try to do more than they're currently capable of tend to get rather poor results. Now, on simplicity, what we found is it generally makes it much easier to achieve consistent robot performance if the mechanisms you build are simple. It often requires it sometimes requires a bit more thought up front to make it simple. But it can save you a lot of time when you're building it and you're programming it. And for a lot of teams, especially the ones where they just have the basic EV3 or NXT or the new Spike Prime kit, you're severely limited in the number of parts. So those big monster robots, you just don't have enough parts to build that anyway. It's also helpful to have mechanisms that can be used for multiple missions, because that reduces the number of attachments, which again reduces the number of parts and your development time and so on. Now, you're going to have some sort of trade-offs, and you got to remember school still comes first. And you had this competition is not just the robot game. There's some other areas, so you got to decide how much time and effort your team can commit to spending on the robot game. We have seen teams that got the robot performance high score award and did not advance the regional championship because they really didn't put any time into, say, the innovation project or preparing for the judging sessions. And generally what we found is teams that do well in the robot game generally do well in the robot design judging sessions if they prepare for it. And I mentioned consistency many times. Consistency is king. Always favor going for consistency. Now, for your development process, now that you have analyzed the game and you know what you're doing, prioritize your robot specifications and list the missions and let that drive your development process. So as I said earlier before, do the easier ones first, do them as a warm-up. And our experience has been that when you go and look at your time, you should allow at least 3 iterations of any mechanism or program to get a good result. It may be helpful to go and post your robot specifications and your mission list on a big piece of paper somewhere in your work area, so you keep on track. Also, budget in, say, a week of practice time before your competition so you can practice running your robot, and also use that time to practice for your judging sessions. Earlier, I talked about playing with all the mission models. Spending that time to experiment up front will make your development process a lot faster, is what we found. And again, start with your high priority missions and make sure you take notes along the way and present them to the robot design judges. One of the things that we ran into in recent years is they started printing the rules in the engineering notebook. However, we noticed that the set of rules printed in there are not complete. It's not all the rules. And occasionally there's errors, and because it's in printed form, if there's any updates to the rules, that notebook can't be updated. So don't depend on that. A shortcut, once you get familiar with the rules, is to use the print out a scoring sheet, because that has the basics of what it takes to score. So that's a nice little shortcut. And that is what the referees at the competitions will use to determine whether or not you were successful at your mission. We have found it very valuable to have an FLL table when you're doing your development work. The standard table is rather big and heavy and bulky and hard to move. In the resources page, I've got links there's a new one that's made out of corrugated plastic that's very light and folds up. I have no experience with it, but it looks promising. And then one of the other robotic supplier, Andy Mark, is supposed to be releasing one, and I've been calling them all week, but I haven't been able to get any information on them. But it breaks up into 3 sections, so you should be able to put that in the back seat area of a compact car. Now, preparing for competition, some of the things to practice are learning what 2.5 minutes feels like, and have one of the 2 team members at the table keep track of the time. There's usually a big time clock that should be visible. Also practice talking about your robot, and often the kid who's really shy and quiet but loves, is really passionate about building, they might just open up to the robot design judges. And you got to remember, that kid might stutter and all that, but the quality of the presentation is not judged it's only judged in the research project, but not in the robot design. Another thing that we clued in on is practice your pit stops when you do the changeover of your attachments and such. And we did that with the robot off, because by doing that, we got rid of a lot of human error and figured out where bits and pieces should go best. Make sure your batteries are charged. Have someone look after that. Know how the field should look, because if you start the match with some mission model that's broken, or some game piece that's not in the right position and you were supposed to go out and get it, well, you're not getting it. So have your team check out check out the table beforehand, and don't let the referees start the match until you're happy with it. I mentioned bringing copies of the rules, because a lot of the referees were trained just before the competition, so they may not know the rules as thoroughly as the teams. And some of the rules are open to interpretation, so it's handy to have the actual document there. Let's see. So in summary, this is the saying they have is, this is the hardest fun you will have. And this is a resource page. I imagine the hosts will make this available so you can get this resource page.
Okay, so the first question I have is, what should rookie teams and developing teams focus on?
They should focus on learning the basics, because it's just like anything else. If you're learning to play soccer, learning to play a musical instrument, you don't just go out on the field and start kicking the ball around. There's certain basic things you need to learn to play soccer reasonably well, and similarly how to play a musical instrument. That's why I kept focusing on the easier tasks, because those require you to know the basics, and then you start extending out from that.
Right. Another question I have is, what are the best missions for my team to work on to get the most points?
That's going to vary a little bit depending on the teams. I've seen some teams that they have stronger programming skills, and so learning things like following lines allows them to solve certain missions easier. And then other teams, they're not so strong on programming, but they have stronger building skills. And so they're able to build, say, some mechanical aids or mechanical guides. And so the coaches and parents should kind of look at their teams, evaluate the strengths of the various team members, and then kind of look at the kind of solutions they're coming up with as they're playing with the mission models, and kind of go. And that's why I set it out as, you go do this, spend some time playing with them, and then you'll get a feel for which ones will be the easiest for your team to solve, and then you go forward with that.
Okay, sounds good. The next question I have, earlier in the presentation, you were mentioning that teams need to dedicate some time and energy to figuring out how to move around and not just the tasks. So what are the best strategies to make the robot go where it's supposed to?
Um, One of like with this year's game, there's all those black lines. So learning to do a line follower would be a good way to get you to a lot of those places. There's also things like line detection so that as you're traveling along the line, you know where you are on the line. So I mentioned EV3 lessons website. It has tutorials that build up to you being able to do those things. There's also other mechanical aids such as following a wall or making mechanical guides that force your robot to be in alignment with a particular mission model. Those are very common ways that we've seen be very successful.
Mhm. Okay. So another question is, what role should watching YouTube videos play in getting ideas for developing a team's robot?
Um, so I I use the example of my sons. They would go and watch a video and they would play it at, some people don't know this, but you can play YouTube videos at very slow speeds, or they'll stop it and then kind of advance almost frame by frame. And then I'll hear them make some comment. Look at that mechanism. Look at how they're transferring power from this part of the robot to that part of the robot. So they're analyzing the small details because, the game from 3 years ago is not this year's game. However, the mechanism to do X from 3 years ago that this team came up with may be very useful for them to do Y this year. Um, so that's a way of using those YouTube videos, and it very much parallels what um, a lot of companies do, like the car manufacturers go and acquire their competitors' cars and tear them apart and analyze them to see what they can learn from them, good and bad. Um, um, Sometimes what can happen is teams get very fixated on using this particular solution, and sometimes showing them some videos of alternative solutions might break them out of that rut.
Going along that same line of thought, for teams who are watching those videos with a giant robot and amazing mechanisms, is there any more specific ideas or strategies that you have for how they could copy that, or focuses?
Um, I would say don't. Just don't. Having coach teams that have done that, it's actually really, really hard to make those work well. And I know there have been some teams that have struggled for years with really impressive looking giant mechanisms that actually didn't work that well. Um, the in general, the bigger you make the mechanism, the more complex you make the mechanism. If you make it twice as big, twice as complex, it isn't twice as difficult to make it work well. It's maybe 4 times as difficult. So that's why I focus on simplicity. And I know there have been some years where my boys built some really big, fantastic things to do a bunch of tasks. And then after the season ends, we see a video where someone's driving all over the field and they just have this little stick that's going up and down, up and down. And it does everything all their big mechanisms did. And you see them kind of, you know.
The next question I have is, the robot doesn't always do what it's supposed to do. How do you recommend fixing or troubleshooting that?
um, Go and watch what it does in detail. Run it like 5 or more times and take notes. Like, is it it kind of veering off course? Is it the mechanism itself? But generally, you really need to focus on the navigation, because if you can't get it there, if you can't get the mechanism into the right position, it can't do the right job. So you got to do that first, get it there first. I know my sons, after a while, what they worked on first was getting the robot to the right location and then building the mechanism to do the job.
Right. The next question that I have is, last year we were told that our robot or strategy was illegal, so we didn't get points for the mission. How would you recommend approaching that issue?
Yeah, I've been the bad man that have told teams, no, that doesn't count. You know, you don't get points. And I've even had to tell coaches, no, that's not legal. And they're, oh, really? There's this rule? Well, yeah, that's why I put a lot of emphasis on studying the rules. And something I didn't mention, but there's an FLL forum, and there's a sub forum that is specifically about game strategy, and then there's a separate sub forum about the rules themselves. They're not official rulings, but a lot of the people participating are like the head referee for some state. There's several of those. So while it's not official, it's a pretty good interpretation of the rules, and people will go and ask, I'm considering doing this, is this legal? And it's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good, as I said, a pretty good interpretation.
So for teams just starting out, would you recommend that they study all of the rules first before they start designing their robot, or should they kind of do them parallel?
Study the rules first, because you have a limited amount of time. And so you don't want to be developing stuff that turns out to be just illegal, right? No sense in wasting your time.
Right, that makes sense. For teams who really struggle with programming, someone asked, do we really have to learn to use sensors? My be broken because they don't work.
It's very, very helpful. I showed a bunch of missions that are just right outside the launch area. Those you don't need any sort of sensors or anything to get there. However, the ones beyond those things, it is very, very helpful. And I had mentioned several times now that EV3 Lessons website, and they walk you through all the steps from learning how to the programming basics, and then they add on the use of sensors, and including teaching you how to do a line follower. So they make it relatively painless to learn the skills you need to use the sensors effectively. So yes, you should learn to use them. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to um, do the more fun missions.
Right. Other than the EV3 tutorials that you've mentioned a few times now, are there any other resources that you recommend for teams?
Actually, one of the local alumni has started a channel called Brickwise on YouTube, and he's got some short little tutorials that he's got one on line follower. He just released one today on about loops. He's got some pretty good robot chassis designs. There's one on wheels and stuff. Um, there's another website called FLL Cast, but you have to pay for a subscription. It looks good, but it's a bit of money. So, but there's some good resources out there.
Another question. If you have any advice for new teams starting out that you would really like to hit home, what would those of advice be?
Well, again, go to EV3 Lessons to learn to program first. It might be worthwhile to spend a couple weeks right up front, if you have team members who have never programmed, to go learn some of those basics, and then it sounds like you have less time left to do it. However, you'll be a lot more effective during the rest of the season. Um, you know, so it's a very worthwhile investment. Again, learning the basics, and then once you get to competition, even if you think your robot sucks, okay, because we've had robots that sucked, go to the competitions, go find the really good teams, and go ask them what did they do, why did they do it, and how did they do it. And the reality is, if you're starting out, you're not their competition, and they're generally very, very open to telling you or talking to you and showing you stuff. Um, and that's how my sons learned a lot of their stuff. They like every competition they went to, they found the top 3 teams, found them in the pits, and started asking them questions. And one of the things you can even do is bring them your robot and run it at a practice table and ask them for advice on how to improve your robot. Because it's difficult to give specific advice to any particular team in a format like this, but when you have someone who's very proficient looking at your robot, looking at your program, they can say, oh, hey, here's an error, here's something you can improve. And then later, it's hopefully as you as the rookie team improve, you can reach out to other rookies and reach a hand down and help pull them up. And you can make a lot of friends that way.
Right. Someone in the chat asked, when I was asking about supplemental resources, what was the extra YouTube channel that you mentioned?
Um,
I think Brickwall something.
Brickwise,
Brickwise.
all one word. He just started a couple months ago. And in the way he's done it, it's very simple to see how the thing is built too.
Someone asked, how should you prepare the robot for judging?
I had mentioned how allow time for 3 iterations. If you have enough parts, when you're working for an attachment for mission X, you built your first revision, and then okay, that kind of worked, and then you build a second revision. Try to keep the first revision if you have sufficient parts, and then if you have enough parts, go build your third revision and bring them all to your competition. And one of the things that judges look for is that you made a progression. Because working as a judge, I asked some kids, how did you come up with this idea? And then they said, well, this was the first thing we tried and we stuck with it. Yeah. And it's like, how often is it successful if you run it 5 times? And some kid goes, oh, it's successful all the time. And then one of the teammates goes, oh, it only works twice. Yeah. But if you can show, a progression, say iteration number 1, iteration number 2, and then you've got sheets of paper showing, well, first iteration was successful 2 times out of 5. The second one was 4 times out of 5. And then the last one was 10 out of 10. The judges are really impressed with things like that. And what we suggest is, say if you're doing something like line following and you use it in 3 different places on 3 different missions, talk about it once. And then the other times you can just say, oh, and we use it several other times, because you probably have other amazing stuff that you've done. So you don't, telling the judges about line follower 3 times, well, you could use that time to talk about some of the other stuff you've done. So.
Right. I believe we're just about almost out of time. We might have
Okay.
30 seconds or something. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, and thank you for answering everyone's questions. I'm sure it was very helpful.
Thanks for this opportunity. Hope it's helpful.
And then next, I don't know if Anaya wants to take it away.
Yeah, so next up we have James and Ava McGill presenting for the Coaches Tips and Tricks presentation. So James and Ava, whenever you're ready to present.
So I'm James McGill, and this is
Not Ava.
Ava McGill, and we are here to talk about First Lego League Coaches Tips and Tricks. Again, this is based on our experiences. Your mileage may vary. So in terms of what we're here to talk about, shockingly enough, coaches tips and tricks, and then we'll have a panel. And again, just as a note, these are our experience. You should use what works best and fits for your team. So in terms of who we are, for FLL experience, I've been coaching and mentoring FLL since 2013. I've judged multiple times at the World Championship and Regionals. Keena, my oldest daughter, was in FLL since 2012 and is now in FRC, or FERC Robotics competition, in her high school in her senior year now. And Ava, my youngest, has been in Brainiac Maniacs since 2016. Ava, do you want to talk about our track record?
The Brainiac Maniacs track record is this. We advanced to the regional championship every year since 2013. Our awards: Champions, Design, Game Score, Strategy, and Project. We advanced to the World's Championships for the 2017 and 2018 season. Since 2017, won first, second, and third place Champions Awards.
Thank you very much, Ava. So you want to tell us a little bit about these photos?
Here's some photos of our team. In the corner you can see our logo, and the others are just photos of us at regionals and worlds.
This is at the World Championship right there, and you can see some of the teams from countries they competed against. That was at the regionals.
I had really fuzzy hair back then.
You had fuzzy hair back then, and you can see the awards that they received. So, and Ava, do you want to give a little bit more about what you're working on?
So I'm working on a silver award currently. The silver award is the highest award a Girl Scout cadet can earn. To earn my award, I am making a lasting impact on my community by creating a program to provide art to senior centers during and after COVID. I'm also working towards the President's Volunteer Service Award in the Congressional Medal Sphere.
Thank you very much. So why we're here is that starting and running an FLL First Lego League team can seem very overwhelming. This workshop will provide tips and tricks from longtime FLL coaches and mentors on how to effectively run a team and avoid the sometimes very painful lessons that have been learned by others. I am all about minimizing the drama, because drama is not very effective or efficient. So this really provides a step-by-step guide with templates for starting, running an FLL team, along with various resources and support. I think, as you know, robotics expertise is not required to start and run a team, but a willingness to have fun and develop kids is. So Ava, why don't you tell us about First Lego League areas?
It's not all about the robots. There are 4 parts of the FLL. Each is scored separately and worth 25% of the overall score, which are innovative project, find a creative solution to a problem, present it; core values, work on an instant team challenge together and outreach; robot design, strategize and create a robot, attachments, and programs to complete missions; and robot game, performance of robot and completing missions during the competition.
That's right. So that's one of the things you'll hear from us, is really focusing on all 4 areas of FLL, which are equally important. When I look at the overall presentation, I'm really looking at the 4 parts, which is how do you plan for first, how do you prepare for a first team, how do you run first team meetings, and how do you compete within the first team itself. So in terms of planning, Phil covered some of this earlier, but there are various resources that are available. First does make, as Phil mentioned, starting last year, a team meeting guide, which is a meeting by meeting guide for coaches, and an engineering notes update and a notebook for team members. At the end of this presentation, there's a very long resources list, which again, this link to this presentation will be provided by Anaya after the meeting itself. So Ava, can you talk about how the people can get themselves ready?
Plan. Get yourself ready. Plan where to put in game robot table. Will you let it stay up, or will you put it up each meeting, which can add variability because it could move each meeting? Or you can plan the meetings that best fit your schedule. If you can't make it, the meeting won't happen. Keep in mind that the meetings may take time on weekends. Plan to set aside time and prepare for the season in each meeting. Taking 30 minutes to plan meetings makes the meeting run much more smoothly.
That's right. So if you take the meeting table up and down, it can certainly add variability because things shift, which can be good or also bad. Why didn't our mission work this time? Well, because you moved the models or table slightly. And again, preparing for the meeting is key for the meeting success. So prepare information management. One of the things we like to do is create a private group for the team members and parents, Facebook, Discord, etc., for internal information sharing. Now, you can also create a public Facebook to share to others, but I like to keep them separate because sometimes information we're sharing about meeting or videos, you don't want to share to the general public. Create a Google Drive to store team documents for easy access, tournament forms, presentation, project files. Not only good for backup, but the last thing you want is to get to a tournament and actually see that you forgot some of the forms itself. And create a sign-up genius for support parent sign-ups. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I really believe in having parents have skin in the game. And Sign Up Genius has a form like Google Forms, but also sends reminders, which I quite like. So this is an example of the Brainiac Maniacs FLL team page. So you can see we have, of course, a photo there. You see the announcements, which talk about the meetings, a list of members, etc. This is for our internal group to share the information. And again, it's been quite effective for communicating to parents because that's our single source. This is an example of our Google Drive, again, for the 2017-18 season. You can see, of course, we went to the World Festival that year, but team information, which were the sign-ups, project information, so the presentations, documents, core values, pre-meeting planning, the robot game, our logo, contact information, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that was our single source for information, so I could always point there, and we always knew we had the latest information. So Ava, why don't you tell us about the support?
Prepare, support. Identify a co-coach who will be at most or all meetings. Share the load, but clarify responsibilities with them, overall meeting, specific topics, etc. Draft an overall timeline working backwards from the tournament. Team can create if experienced, otherwise review and finalize with team. For first meeting, parents should stay if it's possible. If parents can't stay, record the meeting and review the team expectations and first for understanding and agreement.
Absolutely agree. Again, you're not in alone. If you have a co-coach, which I strongly recommend and which is required by some organizations like Girl Scouts, which I work with and represent, it helps you share the load. But the one thing you want to ensure is that who does what. And that can be, like I say, I'm all about the minimizing the drama. So identify that up front. So Ava, what does this represent?
Oh, this represents our timeline. What we have done and what we haven't done. The italics represent what we have done, and then things that aren't italic represent what we haven't done.
So this was actually from last year, or sorry, 2 years ago for your team, and you see the 3 different areas. So project, robot game, and core values, and you can see the different things that they actually listed out and how they actually looked at those. So this lists out your overall plan, and you were able to execute to this, right?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so expectations. This is one of the things I like setting up front very early. In fact, during the first meeting, before the first meeting and during the first meeting. I tell them to ask to say during the first meeting, but I send them an overview first. So, because a lot of parents, they just know Lego robots. They're not sure about FIRST itself. Give them the expectation about the number of meetings and hours per week and attendance expectations. So, learn early on that parents need to know that they have to attend for their kid to be able to actually participate and then actually be involved in the tournament. It's not fair if someone only attends half the meetings that they're running the robot when someone who attended much more of the meetings does not. Support the parental support requirements, the fact that they're going to bring snacks, supplies, etc. The fact that all team members work on all areas, not just the robot. This was a core part of our team. Different teams work in different ways. I like to have the kids rotate around. The fact that kids do the work, not the parents, even when they have the occasional homework. The fact that before tournaments, there's going to be some additional meetings because you need to practice. Not all kids may run the robot at tournaments, especially true depending on the size of your team. And to check if their company provides grants or paid volunteer hours, because that gives fun to the team. For example, my company, Schneider Electric, does, and we were able to get 2 additional robot kits associated with that, simply because of the volunteering we were already doing.
Meet agenda. Create an agenda for meetings to cover timeline topics. Optionally, create a Google slide to guide meetings and link to information. Recommended agenda items. Warm-ups to get focused and to start with good energy. A note taker to rotate that each meeting. To capture information. New team notebook resources available. One-time topics. Building mission models as needed. Challenge updates to stay up to date. Timeline review to stay on schedule. Rotating topics to develop areas in which the team needs more experience or focus, such as presentation or public speaking, research skills, advanced EV3 topics, etc. Time for each FLL area. Project, core values, robot game for balance. Team core values practice. Homework specific to each meeting. And here's an example of what we do each meeting, just so we can stay on schedule and we don't spend too much time on one thing.
Yeah, so this is an example of because we made Google Slides each meeting presentation to cover the topics, and you can see here we have a start time and the duration listed for each topic. It's not military precision, but it's meant to give us a guide. So if we're actually doing the timeline review and we notice it's 3:30, something's gone wrong. So we hope that this keep us in line and make sure that we stay on topic and get the things done we need to get done.
And here's an example of our team notebook. We have all our missions there, and we organize them by seeing how hard they were and how long it would take to get there.
That's right. So you guys actually analyze the missions to pick which one you wanted to do, and then you had voting on the side to actually vote which one. And what are you doing in this picture, Ava?
Yoga.
That was part of our team warm-ups to start with good energy. She normally wasn't smiling that much when we were doing physical activity, but I happened to catch her in a good mood that day. That's true. That's true, and you know it.
Yeah.
Okay. So building mission models. Now, this is really a one-time event. It may be over 2 meetings, depending on how complex they are. But I strongly suggest involving parents to support building the robot game mission models. Send the link to the build instruction to parents. That's actually in the resources section I'll cover later. Have parents bring mobile devices and be able to open the link so they can actually work on that mission model. And assign a specific model to a parent-child to build. Now, one caution is that the child should be the primary builder with more or less support from the parent based on the age or need. I've had more than one time to actually push the parent back a little bit so they're not building the model because they're having a good time and the kid's just over there in the corner. Of course, and one critical part, and Phil mentioned it earlier, do a double check of all models to ensure they're working properly. Nothing more heartbreaking than actually have a mission, have it work, get to the tournament and find out your model was built or put in reverse. And that actually has happened. I've seen teams I've judged or refereed before. So always check to ensure that they're working properly and put in properly.
Meet robot and programming. If little to no previous EV3 experience, spend much of the first few meetings building on an EV3 robot and then programming it. Here's the link to the standard Lego kit robot design, the other robot designs, and the programming lessons. And here's an example of the beginning robot, the starter one.
That's right, which is in the upper left corner. And before Ava's team, with Keena's team, they use this robot or modifications of this robot and were able to, as Phil said earlier, were able to go to the regional championships and do very well each year for 5 years in a row. Now, Ava, your team actually used this from EV3, the core design, and significantly modified that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that served you guys pretty well as well.
The wheels on the edge helped a lot.
The wheels on the edge for following the wall, as Phil said, one of the things is the wall is always in the same place. So if you have the wheels, it lets you move along the wall. Whereas this one, since the wheels weren't protected, it hits a wall, it flips over. Not quite as good.
I know, it could be a cool trick, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think that counts for the points.
Like our flamethrower robot.
Yeah, we don't talk about that one anymore.
Oh.
So, FLL teamwork principles. I have learned a lot, sometimes painfully, about teamwork from FLL. Now, I've actually written articles and given talks on this and actually done leadership training in my company using these principles. And you can see there's actually a link to some of the articles I've written there at the bottom. But just in summary, inspect what you expect. Set the expectations early with team member agreement. Who's doing what, how the team's going to work, etc. Be planful. You fail to plan, you're likely planning to fail. So create a general overall plan. What's your agenda? So that's, you have the overall plan, then the agenda with timings help you meet that plan by setting the expectation of what you're going to get done with each meeting. Fail fast. Sometimes people wrinkle their forehead at this, but I'm a big fan of failing fast. That means you try a lot of things fast to quickly identify what doesn't work so you can focus on what does. Use the course loop. In this case, you use the environment around you to your advantage. For example, as Ava mentioned, it had the wheels on the side of the robot. You can use the wall and follow the wall. So you're actually using the course to your advantage, or aligning on models or what have you. Fight or flight, agree on how decisions are made and conflicts are handled, and we'll talk about this shortly. None of us as smart as all of us, working together to find the best solution, sometimes harder said than done. Think outside the box. The best solution may not be the most obvious. If it doesn't say you can't, then
You can.
you can. I'll never forget one year there was a tower of bricks, and on the tower there's actually a lever on the other side, and you can go get very precise, hit the lever, lift it up, and knock the tower over. But during one of our practices, the robot ran out of control and ran into the tower and knocked it over, and it took about a fourth the amount of time and got the same points. In that case, that was a much simpler and actually better solution for the same points.
Oh, I remember this.
You remember that? I'm glad you remember it. You were there.
No, I don't remember it.
Oh, that was the year before you joined. So sensors and sensibilities, automate your solution. That lets you reuse as much as possible, and keep it simple, silly. Do not overcomplicate your life. The easiest solution is usually the best. Now, the Brainiac Maniacs have also done teamwork principle videos, and they've recorded them, which is in the link here at the bottom of the screen.
Meet. Voting. Discuss and agree a voting method to use as a team. For consensus versus majority rules.
What was that? Consensus? Consensus, I think is the
I
word
know,
you're
I've
looking for.
heard of like fancy food.
Very good. Let's start
tasty.
that one again. Full
Consensus.
consensus versus majority rules. Okay.
Consensus.
Very good. Go ahead.
Open vote, show of hands, versus ballot vote, writing on slip paper. Winner take all. Top voter getter wins. Versus runoff. Top 2 to 3 voters getting voted on again. Single vote can vote one time for one option, versus multiple vote can vote multiple times. Bracket vote, head-to-head vote, or a combination, or others. And you can visit this link to see a video by the Brainiac Maniacs on voting.
So this is one of the things we identified early, is because when you say vote, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. So we had these identified the voting methods early on. We rarely did full consensus because that took time. So last year, for example, the Brainiac Maniacs decided on majority rules and a ballot vote with a runoff. So the top 2 to 3 voters vote on again, and single vote. So they identified these, and that was the voting method. So no one got mad if their vote didn't win, if their option wasn't selected, because they agreed to the system. So they couldn't get mad at each other. They can get mad at the system, but they agreed to it, and that made things much simpler and minimized drama. So Ava, what was this one?
This is an example of a parody song we worked on while we were in FLL.
And you actually see the voting here. This was the one you did. I'm still building for I'm still standing. By the way, the link to the video will be at the end. I'm not going to show it, but the link to the video is at the end of the presentation. So you can see here.
Click on it.
You can see here they had the different options that they voted on, and we ended up with 2 options, and it took 3 votes, and we ended up with the final vote. Again, that was a method that they agreed for how they were going to do the voting, and we had many, many options, and everyone was happy with the result because that's what they agreed to. Now, handling conflicts. This one sometimes people think is the most work. To me, it's actually the simplest, because I established early on that there's 2 ways to resolve a conflict on the team. Either they talk and figure it out themselves, or if they come to me, it's very simple. They do rock, paper, scissors, and whoever wins, wins. So it's random chance or a coin toss. So just saying heads or tails. I use it to resolve it. And much more often than not, it actually becomes, much more often than not, it actually becomes, they fall figured out themselves because they don't want to leave it to random chance. So for example, Ava,
will I get
point
dessert tonight? Yes or yes? Wow, I get dessert tonight.
Very good. See, that's an example of bad way to handle conflict, but still, the coin toss is the right way to go.
Wonderful way to handle conflict.
Very good.
Your way's wrong.
Okay, sub-teams. Ava, tell us about sub-teams.
Sub-teams. For larger teams, 5 plus members, break into sub-teams of roughly equal size. Rotate through FLL areas in parallel. See example on the Meeting with Sub-teams tab in the Google Sheets template.
So as I mentioned, we have very templates that have here. So this is an example for the sub-teams. And we say it for larger teams because it's hard to have, I learned this early on, more than really 3 kids on the robot. And we've always had teams of 10 members because the Girl Scouts, of course, fill it up. So we've always had large teams. And the sub-teams was really the easiest way for us to handle it. So we broke them and rotated through. So what about some of the things they do in the sub-teams?
And sometimes we have specific tasks for each team moving through to limit overlap. Team members may continue on each other's work towards the end of the season as tasks complete. See example on the Meeting with Sub-teams tab in the Google Sheets template.
So for example, here we had sub-team 1 who was working on run 1, which combined 2 missions. Sub-team 2 was working on run 2, which combined 4 missions, and 3 was working on 2 missions. So again, very separate. And then the project, sub-team 1 was detailing the description, 2 was the solution, 3 was the resources, and then for the core values, working on the presentation, they each wrote down how FLM impacted them so we can create an overall presentation. So mission selection and strategy. Similar to what Phil talked about earlier, teams review the mission and select them to develop a strategy. It's not which one is coolest, etc. We actually put a methodology in to look at how many points it's worth, how far the mission is, how easy it is to activate. That means, do I actually have to hit a bar that's very narrow, or do I just have to run into it, or is it very large? How difficult is it to get to? Is it straight there, or do I have to navigate around? Can I combine it with other missions, which then makes it more valuable because I can do this one, and this one, and then run. So there's a template that's available. This is an example of last year's. So for example, elevated places, 50 points. It was, medium from the base, easy to activate theoretically. All you had to do was drive on top of it, but it was hard to get to. So we decided to attempt it. And this wasn't early before we looked at combinations, but you can see at the bottom here, we're looking at design and build, the color match, sustainability upgrades, etc. We identified those that we wanted to attempt, one with a question mark, and then initially what we were going to combine them with. So this was actually a good way for the team to say, these are the missions we want to do, here's how we're going to work together, and it was in a more structured way than this looks super cool. And it really took into account maximizing the points and the effort required. So Ava, tell us about programming practices.
Our programming practices are this. Our recommended programming practices teach members to not override programs, but to add a revision number. We back up all the programs to Google Drive after each meeting. We comment code to describe what the blocks are doing. And we add estimated success rate to missions. Out of 10 runs, how often does the mission succeed? For more experienced teams, teach my blocks for common needs. Convert degrees rotation inches, measure field rounding yes, and turning 90 degrees based on robot performance.
So what does this say from our Google Drive?
This is an example of our program sheet. As you can see, we have Flowtrain with 13 revisions, Horde Remove with 29 revisions, and Flower Fire with 26 revisions, and a lot more.
So this was actually when we went to the World Championship, each one of those folders represented each meeting, and each one contained the programs from the end of that meeting. So you can see the revision at the end was the revision number for that program. So HWRPMFU, which stood for Hidden, Warrior, Robot, Princess, Mermaid, Fairy, Unicorn, because I heard that name many, many times, had 29 revisions. So that was a more complex multi-mission, but actually was very reliable by the end.
I prefer
That's good too. And then at the bottom we have my blocks. So the team, one of the things they decided is early on they wanted to have blocks it would do things like use the gyroscope to turn left a specific amount of degrees or right, or use a medium motor with stall detection. So if it's stalled, the robot can continue on, or moving straight a certain number of inches. If you can have a team that can develop the experience, my blocks make things much more uniform and can be reused. So build practices. So recommended build practices, if you have the ability, do build a backup robot, because that actually makes things much better in terms of if you drop a robot, which unfortunately I've seen at competitions, you have a backup. Plus, as you use a robot, of course, pieces can morph, bend, etc. It gives you a backup for that.
The floor is unfortunately not made of marshmallows. I tested it myself.
That's right. Fortunately, we've never dropped a robot during competition. So do teach members to not modify another's attachment. That's a great source of drama when you built an attachment and somebody changes it without asking you. So first ask them, or you make an equivalent. If you're using a published design, perfectly fine. Just reference what the design was during your robot strategy, but also highlight changes that you've made to it, things to improve, etc. Using a base design is fine. The innovation comes in the changes you've made in the attachments. And have the team address the pros and cons of the design and what can be done to address those pros and cons. For example, with the basic robot, the standard robot out of the kit, it can run into the wall and flip over. So what can you do to change that if that's the robot you want to use?
Me, robot game runners. Identify early method by which team members that will run the robot game competition will be selected. 3 game rounds with 2 team members each, so not all the team members may get to run. Clearly indicate selection method, such as everyone runs for teams less than 6, volunteers to run, time trials for fastest runs, team vote, etc. Do not leave until late in the day in competition. You can switch out during the robot game, but requires a lot of coordination. Ensure that those running have significant practice together. Ensure parents know the selection method and who is running the bot.
Again, this is a great source of drama if it's not handled early. Who's going to get to run the bot? Because usually, actually last year,
I want to run the bot. I want to run the bot.
yeah, that's good. So usually that can be a source of drama. But like I say, a couple of years ago on the team, we only had a few members who wanted to run it. So this year, last year we had multiple members, so they decided they wanted to do time trials. And the time trials were used to select which team pairs would run first, second, and third. We've not had teams switch out during the competition, but that is certainly, I've seen teams do that. It just requires a lot of coordination to be able to do so. So core value roles. You do core value challenges during the competition, like here's 50 sheets of paper, build the tower as tall as possible. I like using roles to help people practice the different aspects of a core value challenge and also give them experience in different types of roles so they can experience and find their comfort zone. So for example, we use brainstorm manager. Ensure the team starts with a good idea, had to set a rule in place that the brainstorm manager runs the brainstorming but can't put in an idea because shockingly the brainstorm manager's idea is always selected. Challenge manager, ensure the team meets the objective of the challenge, but not with an undue focus, because really within FLL it's about how you work together more than meeting the challenge itself. Time manager, make sure you don't run out of time, have appropriate time. Materials manager, everybody just wants to grab and use everything. Materials manager, make sure it's used appropriately and you get the most out of it. Project manager, you have an idea the brainstorm manager selected, how do you actually execute on it? Teamwork manager, make sure the team's working well together. And then the flex team member, if you have more than those number of roles, who really supports all of the other areas.
And they flex.
And they flex, that's right. Ava, can you flex for us?
No.
Nah, that's very good. Okay, so tell us about homework, Ava.
I don't like it.
Okay, tell us about FLL team homework. You love it.
I like it slightly more.
Perfect.
Me, homework. Communicate homework and link to agenda or a presentation for team members that miss meeting and help ensure homework gets done via Facebook or email. Here's the example down below.
So for example, at the end of the meetings, this was the homework and there was a link. Since we use Google Docs, it's not the links to the docs. For example, a project challenge to think about it for the robot game experts to look at points they want to highlight. for core values experts to look at specific areas to think about. And of course, present out the link to the presentation itself. So, miscellaneous meeting tips, virtual meetings in the time of COVID, much more common, but you can use Skype, Google Hangouts, Discord, any other tools for virtual team meetings, share documents, and real-time whiteboarding, etc. Even Zoom, I've heard that's a popular one now.
I personally don't really recommend Zoom because it makes you shut off every 30 minutes.
That's true. If you have an unpaid version of Zoom, it does make you shut off every 30 minutes, but the others are free. And then expense sharing. Our teams never really use this, but some teams share expenses amongst the team and use something like Splitwise to share those expenses for the registration, for the kit, or for even snacks. Now, when we use the parental support, we rotate that so every parent brings snacks and all equals out. We rarely have one parent bring caviar and another parent bring crackers. So pretty much it equals out over time.
Remember when we had that fire eating time?
That was not as tasty as you would think it was. So talk about the final meeting with parents, Amy.
Our final meeting with parents. At the final team meeting, review key information with parents. Show the robot game, presentation, and core values. Talk about the team clothing, t-shirts, other...
accoutrements.
What kind of word is that?
That's a fancy French word for other things that you
Sounds
need.
like some weird French dessert that you can get at, like, I don't know, Walmart. But
French dessert at Walmart? I don't think so. Okay.
Accoutrements.
Very good pronunciation. What to bring?
What to bring? Snacks, chairs, entertainment. We've seen other teams, and we saw how without entertainment, they can get a bit ill-tempered.
That's true. Absolutely true.
The tournament location, the tournament schedule, contact numbers for parents, and a celebration to get together afterwards.
That one's important.
Your team worked together hard, so they deserve some reward for it.
That's right. So what is this, Ava?
So this is an email that my dad made before the competition. And this basically explains what you need to do for the competition.
Yeah, this is something I sent out to the parents because nature abhors a vacuum, and if you don't give the information, either they'll get stressed or make up the information. So what clothing to wear, what to bring, where the location is, what the schedule is, etc. Just like to keep everybody up to date and on the same page. So supply kit. Always create a supply kit to take with you, just in case, your EV3 kit, your parts, backup sensors, power cords, a backup bot if you have it, the computer in case you want to make changes, memory stick with your backup programs. You never know. They've disappeared. Your things have happened. Additional t-shirt in case another team member forgets their t-shirts. Giveaways if you created it. Supplies, Sharpies, tape, glue, etc. for the project. And miscellaneous things, snacks, chairs, entertainments, or money to buy snacks. Now, I know Phil mentioned earlier that sensors are rarely a problem, but I will say that we've encountered that the gyroscope sensor has failed us on more than one occasion during competition, so we always have at least 2 backups and a design where it's easy to replace the gyroscope. So, Avi, you want to talk about the 4 elements?
The 4 elements of competition. First is the rollout game. Second is the project judging. Present an innovative solution to the project challenge. 3, core values judging, present on team core values in a team challenge. And 4, robot design judging, present on robot design itself.
So for the judging, as you may know, there are rubrics because it's not all about the robot. The robot game is most visible. It's unfortunate the other elements aren't, but they're just as important. So the 3 parts to be judged, there's rubrics here. I have links to them. You can take a look at them, but they look at each area. And they determine whether you're beginning, developing, accomplished, exemplary, and they give areas on which you did a great job and areas of focus. These are meant to be positive, but they also give some constructive feedback as well. So it's good to take a look at these just to see how well you think your team has done. Not the end-all be-all to meet exemplary in each one of these, but it is a good guide just to ensure you have a good, well-rounded team.
Compete, robot game. 3 pre-scheduled 2.5-minute robot game rounds. 2 team members at the robot game table at one time. May switch out during the robot game, but requires a lot of coordination, so we don't recommend it. Rounds typically on different tables. The highest score of the 3 rounds is used for the robot game score. If the team received a 0 for round 1, 100 for round 2, and 75 for round 3, then 100 would be the score used.
Yep. So the important thing is you are rotating tables. And remember, all tables are a little bit different. So you get a perfect score on one, you may get not so good on the others. And the highest round score of the 3 rounds is key. The Brainiac Maniacs, the year they went to the World Championships, their very first robot game run, the gyroscope went out. So the robot went out and it spun in circles. So the girls were upset. I was upset. Some of the referees upset. Phil was crying over in the corner. Don't you remember that, Mr. Phil? No. So, and it was.
I think even Kiki was upset. She was so upset she went and morphed food and
Kiki's our cat. So they got a 0 on that round. But they went back, they found the problem, they replaced the gyroscope, and for the next round, they got a perfect score and ended up going to the champion, getting the Champions Award to go to the next level, and I think getting the highest score of the robot game that year. So again, don't give up.
At first, teams were feeling sorry for us, and then they just like turned around.
That's correct. So core values judging. I'll go over the 3 aspects of judging. So it's a 10-minute total judging session. It may be pre-scheduled. You have about 2.5 minutes to talk about how you demonstrated core values to the judges. So within the team or outreach to others, followed by a 2.5-minute core values challenge. So here's 50 sheets of papers, build it, and that challenge may not have a solution. It's about the teamwork, not necessarily solving the challenge. And then 5-minute Q&A. It's recommended to have a trifold poster, and it may be required depending on the competition. And of course, the core value challenge measurement is how well the team works together. I suggest reviewing the rubric to ensure all areas are covered. For project judging, again, 10-minute total judging session, may be pre-scheduled. Most tournaments is, not all. 5 minutes to present your solution to 2 to 3 judges, a 5-minute Q&A. So make sure your presentation includes your setup time because it can start from when the judges say begin, which can be from when you walk in the room. So ideally, you target to finish within 4 minutes and 45 seconds because judging, some tournaments can be very strict on timing, especially with a lot of teams. So you should target to finish in that time and review the rubric to ensure you cover all of the areas. And then finally, robot design judging. So again, 10 minutes, 5 minutes to present your robot, and then 5-minute Q&A. Now, at more and more tournaments, there's not a robot game table. So the team should just talk about the robot itself, what design of the robot was, the thought of was, and have a printout of their programs or on the computer to show the judges so they can see what they worked on. And again, the rubric is a great guide to show the areas that they're covered. So Ava, why don't you tell about advancement?
Compete. Advancement. Teams are judged on project, core values, and robot design. Awards will be given in each of these areas. Teams will also compete in the robot game, the most visible aspect. The highest score will be recognized with the Robot Performance Award. Overall performance is based on the performance in the 4 areas, each with a weighing of 25%.
That's right. So as Phil mentioned earlier, you get the perfect robot game score, in fact, the highest score, and not advance if you don't show core value, you didn't do a project, and you don't give a good presentation to robot design. So it's important to be well balanced in all of the different areas. So afterwards, post-competition meeting, always good to do a review, to highlight and celebrate that the team has done over the season, because you look back, it's an amazing the amount that they've done. Review pictures and videos from the competition, get team feedback on what the team thought they went well and what they thought could have gone better, and review the judging feedback. Now, if you're advancing, get ready to repeat all this over again because you're going from the local qualifier to the regional or perhaps beyond. So you'll want to continue developing and improving your project, your core values, and your robot game and design because other teams certainly will be. Now, a little story about Ava's first year when there was a Brainiac Maniacs and they were a rookie team. They all came in as rookie, so I made them a little bet. I said, if you guys go to the World Championship, they asked me if they went to the World Championship, what I would give them. I'm like, come on, guys. You're a rookie team. The other teams have done well. The Keena's team did well. They went to the regionals. If you go to the World Championships, I'll take you guys skydiving. Well, lo and behold, they actually ended up going to the World Championship. And here is actually them when I took them indoor skydiving, regular skydiving. So you can see the team there and Ava particularly enjoying her iFly flight.
Victory.
Victory was yours. That's correct. So,
Laura
and
reminded you, remember?
that's correct. Laura reminded me. And never forget to
Have
fun.
fun.
So what I'm going to do is quickly go over some of the resources here. I'm not going to go over this in depth. As I say, Anaya will be sending out this presentation, but we have general FLL support, FLL tutorials, Facebook page for share and learn, a blog, discussion forum Phil mentioned earlier, resources on programming lessons, judging rubrics, this season's challenge, missing building instructions, robot resources, for example, the Core DroidBot 2.0, we used the Core 3. It actually worked well, had a nice frame around it. We modified it pretty significantly. The standard EV3 robot, programming resources, Phil mentioned it several times, EV3 lessons, also MyBlock specifically, templates that we use and develop, the timeline and meeting agenda template, the meeting presentation template, the warm-up and core values resources. I always like to have a warm-up activity. Here's some example sites I've used. Core values, which are very similar to destination, imagination, instant challenges. A miscellaneous brick link, great place to purchase parts if you need them. For those in Houston, Houston Space Center, this year probably not so much, but they typically have an overnight First LEGO League camp-in which they talk to some astronauts and can present to them, but also typically Ava Keener or I will give this similar presentation and others and work with teams to help them develop during that overnight. And then specific support, always feel free to email me or email Anaya, the CRyptonite FLL liaison. So, and I think, Anaya, that's what I had. So ready to open up for questions or go into the panel discussions as you see fit.
Yes, so we will be now moving into the panel discussion with Mr. Andrew Barkley, Matthew So, and Phil So. So if you guys could also show your video. Great, so I'll be asking some questions and feel free to ask any questions in chat as you see fit. So I'll start right now. What are some common pitfalls that teams fall into, and what are some solutions that you guys recommend?
Always.
So what was that? Sorry, Ava had a comment. Go ahead, Ava.
Always have an extra gyroscope. Always.
That's from personal experience.
So if none of you have
Well, often this kind of relates to what I was saying in my presentation. I see a lot of teams overextend themselves. And once you decide, oh, we're going to do this mission, this mission, this mission, this mission, mentally you expect that you will be successful. So often what we've tried to do is say, okay, for sure we will do these ones. And we're confident that we have the skills to do it, and then set some stretch goals where, okay, here are some that we're going to find hard. We may or may not be successful. And then that way, if you're not successful, you weren't depending on it, there's much less disappointment.
And does anyone have anything to add on to that?
I was gonna say, sometimes teams take the competition a little bit too seriously, shall we say, and they show up to competition, they spend all their time either trying to make the robot work, practicing the presentation, any other things, and then if they don't quite meet their expectations, they end up having actually not a very good time in the end, despite having worked really hard to get there. That actually even happened with one of my teams, for that matter. The first year they got 4th place on robot performance, but they were upset that they didn't get more points, of all things.
I would recommend to remember that things are always a little bit different at an event. So if you go to a qualifier event, the tables are going to be different. The rooms might not be exactly as expected. So try to understand ahead of time what is likely to vary before you get there, and practice variations.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next question. Do all team members have to participate in building and programming the robot and in the innovation project? Go ahead, Mr. McGill.
I have an opinion on this, and my opinion is yes. Now, different teams are in different ways, but I think it's always good to have all team members involved in all aspects. Some teams do specialize, and after a period of time, our team did as well. Some preferred robot programming, etc. But I think really one of the values of FLL and FIRST is getting that well-rounded and broad experience. So we did the rotation, and I thought that that really added a lot of skills to it. Now, again, different teams, different ways, but to me, I think that is where you can get the most value.
Make sure there's more than two people having experience in one thing, because if you don't, one could be sick during competition, and you don't have anyone to fix the robot.
Very, very good point. We've actually seen that before. Very good point, Ava.
Something in this year's judging rubric is there's in the judging rubric, here we go, in the design section of the innovation project rubric, and then in the communicate section, the robot design rubric, there is specific wording in there for the judges where they're trying to determine whether only one or two of the kids built and programmed the robot or everybody had input into it. And so, and the way it is set up, the more of your team is involved in some way, the better you will do in those specific judging rubrics. So while most of the say robot building and programming, while on a team of say 6 or 8 or however many, maybe most of it is done by 2 people because they have the most passion, most ability, and the most desire. Having the other team members involved and contributing in some way, even if they're just contributing the ideas, then that will help your team do better in those judging sessions. And it's the same way with the research project. Remember, the people providing an idea don't actually have to know how to execute that idea.
Great. So, Mr. Barkley, do you have anything to add to that?
So it's, not all teams are going to be the same. Teams are allowed to be anywhere from 2 to 10 student members. And all kids are going to be forming different teams differently. So there's that. Personally, I value having every team member have solid experience in the 3 major areas. I think that's where they're going to get the most benefit personally. From a judging perspective, it's also a little more impressive to see a team where every member has a strong contribution to each component. So that is valued. So that's recommended. We want everyone involved to have the full experience. That said, if you have a larger team on the higher side, on the 10 or so, you're not going to have all 10 doing the same mission, right? Or doing all aspects of the project. You will have some division of labor, and it's beneficial you could do potentially a more comprehensive job if your team can still organize at such a large size, right? Having more team members can make other things more complicated about your meetings and all of that. So if the team can organize well, having more members could be beneficial. But my experience is that when you have fewer than 10, I've never had a large team, you can balance responsibilities pretty well across these areas, and everyone still can have really solid contributions across everything.
Great. So moving on to the next question. So we heard Mr. McGill talk about what he does when there's drama in his team. But for the rest of you, what do you do if there is drama at a competition or during a meeting?
So the word competition has popped up a lot. And particularly kids at this age do see it as a very competitive thing, especially when we're talking about comparing scores and all of that. But the competitive aspects of the program are not where you're getting most benefit. I prefer to use language like call it an event, call it an opportunity to share. And yes, of course, we want to do our best and we want to look, the best that we can in relationship to our peers, but we also want to celebrate how the other teams are doing, right? Everyone has worked so hard on this independently. It's a great opportunity to celebrate. So I would de-emphasize being overly competitive in preparing for any of this, so that when they arrive, they realize, okay, now we get to show off. And it can be so impressive when you see even the youngest ones knowing everything about what they've done from a project perspective, from a robot perspective. And you can ask them to talk about that, whether it's in, if you're volunteering, which I would encourage you to do, you can do it as a volunteer in judging sessions, or you can just roam the pits and see how excited everybody is and just start asking people, so tell me about this, this looks neat. And you'll see that they're fully enabled to discuss that. You might not get along with them in any other way, but it's a common language when they start talking about their projects and their robots, and you can really get them excited about things. I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered the question. I just kind of trailed off.
No, that was great. So if no one has anything to add on, okay, go ahead.
So it kind of depends on what your team's expectations are. Some of my teams have had really high expectations, and then it becomes much more difficult to handle when there is drama or any kind of thing, because there's a much stronger disappointment if something doesn't work. So for them, you kind of have to make sure that they're really well prepared and such to try to minimize the chance of it happening in the first place. If they're just there for fun, it's a lot easier to handle it. They don't need to worry so much about what actually happens. So yeah, it's important to kind of figure out how to deal with this drama or prepare for it, depending on how your team is really expecting to do in the first place.
I didn't really talk about it in my presentation, but I think I had a line in there about practice day. I know Mr. Barkley was talking about view these as events, and they are, even when you try to de-emphasize the competition aspect, it is still quite different from when you're practicing at home or at the school. The practice days are somewhere in between your practicing at home and the actual event where things count. So that's part of why I've always encouraged teams to, if they're available, go to practice days or try to go and find other teams in your area and scrimmage, get together, although not at this current time, but go and scrimmage, and you get out of the comfort zone of working at home and you start making steps to doing things under a little bit more pressure when you're surrounded by people you don't know, things like that. And that helps ease the team members, and sometimes it's the adults, into a different environment. And there have been times when, say, as head referee, if I had to handle some drama, and it always helps to ask a lot of questions. To find out what the root cause of the drama is. Like I remember one time some kid came to me crying about somebody taking his robot and throwing it on the floor. And it's like, no, that is not acceptable. And in talking and talking and talking, and asking a lot of questions, we found out it was somebody on his own team who had done it. And so we had a discussion with the teacher about, that they need to deal with this situation. And then, we discovered it was not the first time that that sort of thing has happened. So, afterward, we, talked with the kid, and we were able to make him happy, so yeah, find out what the root cause of the drama is.
So next question, are there any general mistakes that you have made as a coach? Go ahead, Mr. McGill.
So many mistakes. So, but
Oh, remember when one time you
many.
saw like them just deconstruct a new robot? All you did was stare and
Yes.
like.
Not all scars are physical. So the one thing I'd say is that not anticipating running the robot and specifying how that was going to be run and leaving that to competition day. That was a big early learning drama mistake, because leaving it to competition day is guaranteed to have drama in terms of who's going to run, and then you will have, and setting parents' expectations about that. I mean, one year I had a kid who showed up at maybe a third of the meetings, and her mom's expectation was that kid was going to run the robot at the competition. She was in Lego robotics, and I did not set that expectation earlier. And it wasn't drama from the kid, it's drama from the parents that can be the worst. So that's why I set these expectations early now in terms of the parental and kid expectation, attendance, etc. Not setting expectations early always comes back to bite you. So that was one of the most painful learnings that I had, that I tried to establish those early on.
Anyone else?
One mistake I can cite is part of the reason why there are two of the points I make in my presentation, which is allow 1 week for practice before your competition, and anyways, don't be developing right up until like 2 or 3 a.m. of the morning of the competition, because I remember some of that stuff that was developed that year. Oh yes, the other point was practicing your changeovers. Anyways, that particular year we had some really big complicated mechanisms that the changeover time was about 48 seconds, which is really painful when you consider the whole match is 150 seconds. So it was really, really impressive, but it really cost the team.
Early on, when we were first getting started, we didn't really understand what to expect in the judging process. And I think James gave a pretty good overview, although things are likely to be very different this year. Both the competition has been updated to where we're expecting that there's only one judging room for all of the presentation aspects, and the rubrics have been updated substantially as well. We're still looking to get some specific notice from our region about how competitions or events are going to be organized locally, but we are expecting a combined judging experience, and a simplified structure for the actual rubrics. That said, what I was getting at is when we were getting started, we didn't really know what these sessions were really about. We knew that they were topical, that you're supposed to talk about your project and that you're supposed to talk about your robot design, but we didn't really understand the rubrics well. I would say if we had spent more time as a team looking at the rubrics early on, there would be a lot less confusion going to the events.
Kind of related, another little story. One of the first years, maybe the first year, my sons competed in the research project or innovation project. They made this stop motion animation movie, and it was to run on a laptop. And that spawned two errors. One is all they did was put this in front of the judges and hit the button and it would run. And that was their whole presentation. And what we missed was that you had to actually talk at some point, even if it was just to introduce this video. So they were told it's a very good presentation, but because you did not talk, you're not going to do very well. Second was we relied on this laptop, and laptop speakers are very, very weak. And that year, the judging was all done, all the judging was done in a gymnasium with the judges at tables around the perimeter of the gym. So you could hear the people on either side of you talking. And this laptop was barely loud enough. And we scrambled and eventually found a pair of earbuds that we plugged in, and the two judges each shared the earbuds to listen to the listen to the audio. So don't so that read the rules very, very thoroughly, and don't try to avoid depending on technology.
For my own groups, we've on the first year we actually had a shared space with actually 2 or 3 other teams, and we had a problem where it wasn't actually that clear who was using what computer to program, and we had a number of meetings where we had to redo work because another team member would go along and change the program to fix their problem that they had on the wrong computer. So we eventually had to make sure we were clear on who was using what computer and who was using what robot and what program, so we don't have that again.
Oh, and in that same workspace, I remember working with one kid, and we got this one mission working really well, and then we put aside the attachment and then went to find the rest of the team to go and demonstrate this. And when we came back, we couldn't find that attachment, and then eventually noticed a lot of those parts on one of the other team's stuff. So they had said, "Oh, look at all these parts we could use." So
That's not just across
that's a
teams,
word of
Phil. That
warning.
happens within teams too.
Yeah, the word of warning, especially for those who are coaching or mentoring multiple teams that share a space.
So we got a question in chat. Will judging most likely be done by virtual meeting or still be in person this year due to the pandemic?
We haven't gotten any guidance from our region, First in Texas, ACES East, about how we're going to be running the competitions this year. We're hoping that we'll get some of that guidance soon.
So moving on to the next question then. How does a team divide up their time between the various judging areas?
I don't have specifics on this, not in front of me. I do understand that there is a list that has been circulated from First proper, not just our region, but from First itself, about how the judging experience is expected to go. I believe there are presentations for project and robot, and there's some time allocations that are given there. I can't remember the particulars.
I think this year there might actually not be a teamwork exercise, something like that. Mr. Barkley was saying how the judging is, there's some reasonably significant changes, but it'd be good for everybody to, on the First website, there is a document that talks about I forget off the top of my head what the name of that document is, but it's something like judging workflow or something like that.
Judging session flowchart for teams.
Yes, and that walks you through what they're envisioning doing. However, my impression is not all regions are required to do it that way,
Right.
but it is likely that they will.
Yeah. So actually, it's a good point, Mr. Barkley, and I hadn't realized the big changes here, but I was looking at the judging flow chart. So if it's followed, it'd be 2 minutes for a team welcome to set up introductory conversation, 5 minutes for the project presentation, and still 5 minutes for Q&A. Robot design, same thing, 5 minutes and 5 minutes, present and Q&A, and then 3 minutes for core values reflection, and then 5 minutes for judges' verbal feedback. Yeah. And I'll send out that link. I'll update the presentation I had and send out that with the updated links to all those documents and updated rubrics as well.
Now, kind of the person asking this question was asking, what do you do if it's virtual? Who knows how that's going to happen, whether it's broken up, whatever. If it is in person, based on prior experience and from seeing what happens at these events, if it goes as per the new flow chart, you're going to be bringing your robot and all the attachments and such for the robot design judging and all the materials related to your innovation project, whereas in the past you'd be assigned a separate time and a separate place for each of those. So now you have a lot more stuff to bring with you. And in the past, we've advised teams, like I've seen teams that have built really big props, some that you need the whole bed of a full-size pickup truck to transport. And and you see them taking this down a hallway, and a crowded hallway. So in view of that, then you as coaches may want to guide your team to avoid making really, really big props for any sort of innovation project, just for your own sanity.
Well, in the regionals, Phil, the call last year was a bit of a surprise for first in Texas. Again, it was virtual, not a big deal, but they did do all three judge. You had to bring everything with you, and the parents weren't allowed to go back into the judging area. So if the kids had a lot, like props and other things, they needed to take it back all with them and manage what goes into which room where. So don't forget the robot when you go in the robot design room, etc. So you're right. Ideally, the simpler is the better. And then very clearly in defining who does what and who carries what into which session. If it's combined, simpler, but still can be a lot to carry.
Right. It should probably be scaled well to the size of your team, your student members, so that they can actually do all the materials management.
Absolutely correct. Good point.
Now, if we do virtual tournaments this year, we don't have a lot of experience in that. There was one what they called virtual invitational that happened at the end of last season, City Shaper. And I have spoken a little bit with some involved with the running of that tournament, and they attempted to do live judging, like live streaming of the robot rounds, and apparently that was a huge challenge. It may very well be that there is going to be a video submission style, and FIRST has circulated a document specifically about COVID-19 and virtual, where they're recommending for robot runs a video submission of a good run, and they have a lot of criteria about what they'd like to see in frame recording the robot in performance. As far as the rest of the judging aspects, I don't know if that would be virtual appointments or if those would also be video submissions.
I see. So, next question, how can team members be encouraged to work on the innovation project?
One of the first things you can actually keep in mind is you can work on the innovation project before the season starts. So generally they release the season theme way before they actually release the robot rules and such. So for example, on my last year, we actually started working in like June or May or so on the project. We had a good idea of what we were going to do then, and then you do a more equal distribution of work after the robot roles come out. So your team can actually start by focusing primarily on the research project before the season actually starts. Now, to motivate them, you can actually also have them take home some of the work, because I found that it was a lot easier to work on the research project at home, everyone at home, and then when we go to the meetings, we work more on the robots. And I found that actually a reasonable way to divide up the work and give the team members something to work on when they are not at the meeting.
So for our team, we've always encouraged them to be making progress between all of our team meetings on on the robot design as well as on the project. So they should always be setting goals for what's next in those, and actually setting those goals as to be attainable before the next team meeting. And of course, teams meet in many different ways, especially now. But unless they're working on something, then they're not going to be motivated on it. So they always have to have something that they can be pushing for next.
I'll say that's where I found the timeline to be useful, like the overall timeline and then the specific agendas of the meeting, because you're breaking a big problem into small bite-sized chunks. And I found it a bit easier to keep people focused and the team focused on finishing those bite-sized chunks because it's specific to them and their names against that. So I found that to be an easier motivator, because work on this big thing versus take this step and this step and this step in individual sub-teams, I think was made it a bit easier to digest for them.
And depending on the team as well, some will get very into improvements on the robot aspects. And robot design is important, but it's so objective and simple to just keep on iterating on that instead of balancing your time on project. So there are many ways that you could make sure that you still make progress on project at the same time. Maybe it's time boxing any of your robot exercises, whatever. You have to give all these tools to your team to make sure that they can plan to continue to make progress on the project. And once they finally get to the point where they understand what their project should be and what it's going to take to actually deliver on it, it's a little easier to keep them excited about the project. Right? When it's a huge unknown, that's when they're not working on it.
One of the things about the research project or innovation project is that it's generally defined very, very broadly. And so, you know, like say one previous year, it was a space theme relating to long-term human space exploration. So you obviously couldn't do a project on purely sending a robot out on long-term space exploration, but you could do almost anything. And I saw teams talking about all kinds of different aspects of space exploration, focusing on little minutia like blocking the effects of cosmic radiation to food sources to all kinds of stuff. So if you kind of look at that, because the definition or the constraints on your or the guidelines for your innovation project are so wide, instead of trying to force your team to do something about something that they may not be interested in, you go and find what they are interested in and find a way to link it to the theme. So if some kid is really interested in food, well, most kids are interested in food, but then you can link it to that in some way. And then because the team members are interested in that to begin with, they're much more willing to put time and effort into it. And the time that they spend working on it, they'll probably get a lot more done than if they were forced to work on some project that they weren't really interested in.
To plug next week's virtual conference a little bit, we are going to be talking about that. It's one of the presentations.
Just going back just a little bit to that virtual FLL thing, for people who are interested in what that might look like, if you go on YouTube and look for a channel called First Updates Now, or FUN, F-U-N, there's I had found it on my phone here, but it went blank. Anyways, it is something like FLL virtual invitation. So if you do a search for First Updates Now virtual FLL invitational or something like that, it'll pop up. And it was sometime around May, I believe. Trying to find it again on my phone. but I've watched part of it. It consists of 2 different videos, and they're both really long, like 8 hours. So I have not watched the whole thing. Here we go. FLL Share and Learn Virtual Open Invitational.
Yeah, so we can also send that video out to the participants and attendees today, along with Mr. McGill's presentation. I think around now we should start closing down, and if you guys have any final words, please say them now. And okay, so to all the people who are here today, we will be sending out the presentations as well as later on the recording of this video. Next week we also have another presentation. As Mr. Barkley has said, we will be having a best practices of core values and best practices of project. So same time next week, we will be having a 2-hour presentation. So thank you all for attending today, and if you are interested next week, we will also be sending out the dates for that. So
Thank you, and great job.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.